Hi, everyone, this is the Encyclopedia channel. In this issue, we will talk about a problem that is relevant to everyone: consciousness. So, what is consciousness? Are consciousness and the real world consistent? Are we living in a computer or a dream? Consciousness refers to the ability of human beings or other organisms to experience subjective experiences such as perception, thinking, memory, emotion, and willingness. It is an internal and individual psychological phenomenon. Consciousness has always been a complex and mysterious concept in fields such as philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience, and there are still many controversies and unsolved mysteries. Philosophically, the nature and origin of consciousness have been the subject of endless debate. Some philosophers believe that consciousness is an essence independent of matter, that is, a spiritual entity that exists in the human soul. Other philosophers, however, believe that consciousness is a physical phenomenon produced by neural activity in the brain. In psychology, consciousness is considered to be one of the central questions in psychology. Psychologists generally divide consciousness into two types: explicit and implicit. Explicit consciousness is what people consciously perceive and think about, such as our attention, memory, judgment, and decision-making. The implicit consciousness refers to those unconscious, underlying psychological processes, such as our habits, prejudices, and emotions. In the field of neuroscience, researchers try to explore the neural mechanism of consciousness through methods such as brain imaging technology and neuron recording. Consciousness, they argue, arises from complex interactions between neurons and synapses in the brain. Different areas of the brain process different types of information and communicate and coordinate between different areas, ultimately shaping our perception, thinking, and subjective experience. While many mysteries remain about the nature and mechanisms of consciousness, our understanding of it is advancing. With the emergence of new research methods, we can hope to explore the nature of consciousness more deeply in the future and solve many fundamental questions about consciousness. Are consciousness and the real world consistent? The relationship between consciousness and the real world has long been an important question in philosophy and science. While there is no easy answer to this question, there are a few different perspectives and theories that can help us understand it better. Some philosophers and scientists believe that consciousness and the real world are identical. They believe that our consciousness is an accurate and objective reflection of the external world, and our perception and thinking are based on direct feelings and reasoning about the real world. This view is called direct realism or realism, which believes that consciousness and the real world are consistent, and humans can obtain real knowledge and understanding through perception and thinking. However, other philosophers and scientists take a different view. They believe that there is some degree of inconsistency between consciousness and the real world. For example, some philosophers believe that human perception and thinking are limited. We can only receive and understand limited information. Our perception and thinking are affected by factors such as personal and cultural background, so our understanding of the real world, certain errors and limitations may exist. This view is called subjectivism, which believes that consciousness is subjective and individualized, and our perception and thinking can only reflect our own subjective experience, and cannot directly reflect the real world. In addition to the above two extreme views, some philosophers and scientists believe that the relationship between consciousness and the real world is complex, and there may be some intermediate views. For example, some scientists believe that our consciousness may be based on the brain's simulations and predictions of the external world. Such simulations and predictions may be limited, but they can help us better understand and adapt to the real world. Overall, the relationship between consciousness and the real world is a complex question without a simple answer. Different viewpoints and theories can help us understand this problem better, but we still need further research and exploration to solve this problem. So, what are the inconsistencies in the feedback of the things we see with our eyes to our consciousness? There may be some inconsistencies in the feedback of the things we see with our eyes to our consciousness, which mainly include the following. Optical illusions. Our eyes can create visual errors that cause us to see things that are not what they really are. For example, we might see non-existent images, misplaced images, or streaks of different colors. These optical illusions may be due to the physiology of the visual system or environmental conditions. Context effects. Our awareness can be misinterpreted by context, causing us to have inconsistent perceptions of what we see. For example, when we see a piece of text, our understanding may be affected by the previous text or the subsequent context, causing our understanding to be inconsistent with the original meaning. Individual differences. Everyone's ability to perceive and understand is different. Some people may be more sensitive or understand certain things more deeply, while others may have cognitive biases or misunderstandings. This individual difference may be related to factors such as age, gender, cultural background, and cognitive ability. Perceptual bias. Our consciousness may be affected by some prior factors and produce perceptual bias, causing us to misunderstand what we see. For example, we may have expectations and prejudices about known things, causing us to ignore some details or produce deviations in the cognitive process. To sum up, there may be inconsistencies in the feedback of what we see with our eyes to our consciousness. These inconsistencies may be caused by factors such as physiological characteristics, environmental conditions, individual differences, contextual effects, and perceptual biases. Understanding these inconsistencies can help us understand and recognize the world around us more accurately, improving our cognitive and coping skills. So, do we live in the conscious world or the material world? We live in both the conscious world and the physical world. Consciousness and matter are two different concepts, but they are interrelated and cannot be completely separated. First of all, our bodies and brains are material existences, and the world around us that we perceive is also made up of materials. The properties and laws of these materials constitute the material world as we understand it. The existence and changes of matter exist objectively, and the material world we perceive and understand is relatively consistent with the real material world. Secondly, our consciousness is produced by our brain, and our thinking, perception, emotion, etc. are all manifestations of consciousness. The existence of consciousness is our own subjective experience. It is not a physical existence, but it is closely related to our body and brain. Consciousness plays an important role in our experience. It is the basis of our perception, thinking, decision-making, and action. Therefore, we live in both the physical world and the conscious world. The world around us that we perceive is not only restricted by material limitations and laws, but also influenced by our own cognition and feelings. Our subjective experience and objective existence are interrelated, and they cannot be completely separated. We need to pay attention to and understand both the physical world and the conscious world in order to better recognize and understand the world we live in. Then, is it possible that we live in a large computer and not in the material universe? This question involves a philosophical thought experiment, simulation theory. Simulation theory claims that the reality we live in may just be a virtual world simulated by advanced intelligence or external entities. Therefore, we are actually living in a world simulated by a large computer, rather than in a physical universe. While this idea sounds interesting, there is currently insufficient evidence to support it. The material universe as we understand it, including our own body and brain, exists in the objective material world, and we can study and understand this world through scientific methods. The existence of the virtual world does not mean the non-existence of the physical world. Both can exist at the same time. In addition, if we live in a computer-simulated world, the laws and properties of this virtual world may be affected by the limitations of simulation technology and the wishes of designers. The physical laws, spatial structure, time passage, etc. in the virtual world may be different from the physical world we understand. For example, there may be phenomena and events that do not conform to the laws of physics in the virtual world, or there may be spatial structures and time passages beyond our imagination. The designer of the virtual world may also modify and adjust the virtual world so that the laws and properties of the virtual world will change. In addition, the difference between the virtual world and the physical world we understand may also be manifested in our perception and cognition. In the virtual world, we may experience different sensory experiences from the real world. For example, we may not be able to perceive the texture, temperature, humidity, etc. of substances, or the colors, sounds and smells in the virtual world may be different from our real world. There are differences in perceptual experience. Therefore, if we live in a computer-simulated world, the laws and properties of this world may differ from the physical world we understand. This difference may exist in physical laws, spatial structure, time passage, perception and cognition, etc. So if we live in a virtual world and don't know what the real world is like, how can we know that the virtual world will be different from the so-called real world? If we live in a virtual world, our perception and cognition are formed in the virtual world, and we cannot directly perceive the existence and characteristics of the real world. Therefore, we cannot directly compare the differences between the virtual world and the real world. However, we can get some food for thought by reasoning about and comparing the relationship between the virtual world and our understanding of the physical world. For example, we can consider whether the physical laws, spatial structure, time passage, etc. that exist in the virtual world are similar to what we observe in the real world. If the physical laws, spatial structure, and time passage in the virtual world are different from those in the real world, we can conclude that there are differences between the virtual world and the real world. In addition, we can also consider the origin and purpose of the virtual world. If the virtual world is created by some external entity, then that entity's intent and purpose may be related to the physical world as we understand it. We can infer the relationship and differences between the virtual world and the real world by knowing the intent and purpose of this entity. Finally, it's worth noting that these inferences and comparisons are made only assuming we live in a virtual world. We are currently unable to determine whether we are really living in a virtual world, so these reasoning and comparisons are just philosophical thinking, not descriptions of the real world. Is it possible that we are living in a dream? From a philosophical and scientific point of view, it is possible that we are living in dreams to some extent, but this situation is different from dreams in the ordinary sense. What we call ordinary dreams refers to a series of fictitious visual and sensory experiences produced by the brain during sleep. And when we speak of living in a dream, we refer to the broader concept that what we perceive to be our real world may actually be an illusory experience. This view stems from a philosophical consideration that we cannot be sure that the world we experience is real, or that we cannot be sure that our perception and cognition are consistent with the external world. On this view, we cannot rule out that we are actually living an illusory experience, like that experienced in a dream. Although this view may seem bizarre, it has been controversial and discussed in the fields of philosophy and science. For example, some neuroscientists and philosophers believe that our perception and cognition are limited and influenced by our brain and nervous system, and these limitations and influences may distort the real world we experience. Therefore, we need to think carefully about everything we experience, including our perception of the real world. In conclusion, although we cannot be sure whether we are living in a dream, we can use philosophical and scientific thinking to understand the world we experience and understand ourselves better. Well, I believe that everyone has a relatively comprehensive understanding of consciousness. What do you think your understanding of consciousness is? Welcome to discuss with everyone in the comment area.